Hi, I'm Mike Knetter, and welcome to the UW Now Livestream series, where we bring you experts from the UW community to talk about timely and important topics. The news in recent weeks has been full of high-profile incidents, ransomware attacks that have affected U.S. supply chains. Tonight, we will explore the what, who, and why of cyber attacks and how we can minimize their likelihood. Joining us on the show are Ramesh Gupta, the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Network Security Product Development at FireEye, recently in the news for their role in detecting the SolarWinds hack, and Somesh Jha, the Lubar Professor in the Department of Computer Sciences. Gentlemen, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. I know our audience is anxious to hear about the world of cyber attacks and ransomware from experts like you. Kicking us off tonight is Professor Somesh Jha. Somesh has been at UW-Madison since 2000 and teaches security and privacy for data science and introduction to cryptography in the Department of Computer Sciences. His work focuses on analysis of security protocols, survivability analysis, intrusion detection, formal methods for security, and analyzing malicious code. Recently, he has focused his interests on adversarial machine learning and privacy. Somesh has published very high-profile articles in both conference and refereed prominent journals, and he's won numerous Best Paper and Distinguished Paper awards. He is also an NSF Career Award winner and a Fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery and the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. He earned his PhD from the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. Somesh, thank you for joining us tonight, and I look forward to hearing your take as an academic on what's going on with ransomware and cyber attacks.
Okay, thanks, Mike. That was a great introduction. I really appreciate it. Okay, so if you have paid any attention to recent what's going on, every day there is something, this company was hacked, this company was hacked, this person, this company paid $11 million in ransomware through cryptocurrencies and so on. So this talk is more about first going through one of the ransomware attacks, whatever I can find it on the web, and we will talk about it. One of the big issues with a lot of these ransomware attacks is that the companies don't release much information. I guess they're ashamed of it or whatever, and so it's very hard to find. So you have to kind of piece through talking to colleagues, looking at some blog posts on this article, that article. So that's what I've tried to do. Next slide, please. So, I mean, this is something that I've already said. There's a deluge of ransomware attacks recently. Like, I think every week there's something that is going on. Next slide. Okay, so let's go through. Let's take one of the attacks and kind of just a little bit talk about the sort of the various steps or the various things that happen, deconstruct the attack a bit. Again, as I said, I got this information. I actually, believe it or not, when I received the invitation to give a talk, I actually know somebody at Colonial Pipeline in Houston. So I actually wrote to them saying, hey, are you guys releasing anything? What happened? And the answer was no in capital letters. So this is what I could get from looking at various sources that I had, and mostly some blog articles. Some people wrote about it, what happened. So this is not an official account of what happened. This is what I could glean from the web. Okay, so April 29th, 2021, there was an initial access into the networks by the attacker, the network of Colonial Pipeline. And this was through a VPN using an account that was actually no longer in use, okay? And generally, this this account's password was found on the dark web. So essentially what happens is a lot of the hackers almost have a parallel ecosystem to sell things like stolen passwords, stolen credentials, different type of malware, different type of so on and so forth. So actually, there were, I'm not doing that much work right now in this space, but I had students who had penetrated the dark web and were able to see all that. So this account's password was found on the dark web. And the thing is, the Colonial employee might have used the same password who was associated with that account on another account, maybe Spotify or something, and that got hacked. And this is a very common thing that hackers do. Generally, people don't tend to, if you are using some password for a bank and using the same password to get into something else, generally people use similar passwords. So if I hack a different website, I can try the same password. Okay, and the big thing, the account didn't use two-factor authentication. Okay, and so the hackers were able to get in with the password in the network and then go all over the place. May 7th, 2021. So like 8 days. A ransom note was discovered by an employee at a company printer. Okay, and the employee notified the supervisor. By 6:10 a.m., the pipeline had been shut down because they were like, okay, I don't know, the hackers have all they are inside the network, so they got scared, and I think rightfully so, and they closed at 6:10 closed the pipeline down, and obviously this caused a major disruption. From what I could get, this pipeline delivers a lot to the East Coast, so a lot of major disruption in the East Coast. Next slide, please. So I believe Mandiant is also a FireEye company. They did a sweep of the network and installed a lot of new detection tools to see who else is going in the network and so on. The breach did seem to be very limited. For example, from what I could tell from various articles, they didn't get close to the control systems that actually sort of operate the pipeline. The Colonial hackers were a Russian-linked cybercrime group known as DarkSide, and they basically, the ransom note, so to speak, said, hey, pay us 4.4 or whatever million in cryptocurrencies, otherwise we have a lot of data. They said close to 100 gigabytes of data. We are going to release that to the public. And surprise, surprise, because of this, now Colonial is taking security really seriously, has hired a bunch of consultants, a lot of companies, and a lot of tools and so on. Okay, but I just want you to pay attention that they have taken a lot of actions after they sort of got hacked. It's like taking a martial arts class after somebody beats you up. Next slide. So as a company and an organization, what can you really do, right? And first thing is, and Ramesh is going to talk about great tools for security and some of the techniques. Just basic security hygiene, like two-factor authentication. If an employee leaves, make sure those accounts are deactivated. Protect the data at rest. So, for example, there are a lot of solutions where when the data is at rest, it's encrypted. So even if a person gets in, if they don't know the secret key, they can't do anything. Right? So just basic security hygiene, just like, brushing your teeth or, taking a shower every morning, that sort of stuff. And actually, it's very clear, right, from the Colonial case, it's very clear that the basic security hygiene would have helped them. One thing that I see a lot from companies are they're very stingy with their security budget. Okay? And I was thinking about this. And one of the reasons is that the good security measures, the benefits of that are invisible, right? Like, oh, you didn't get hacked the entire year. Okay. Maybe the hackers were just lazy and, it's nothing to do with the security tools. So I think what I generally see is a lot of companies and organizations are very stingy with their security budget just because the benefits are invisible, right? It's like life insurance. There is a very nice quote that a security blogger had, that security is like life insurance. Everybody buys I have good life insurance, but I didn't even die once today. So you say, okay, why the heck do I need life insurance, right? But remember, the thing is, it's like you have to take this like insurance. You're insuring against these kind of really sort of big things that can have a huge impact. Now, one thing that I want to say is more data needs to be shared. So, for example, as I said, whatever data Colonial can share with other companies can help those companies defend themselves, right? I feel like there is a lot of shroud of secrecy around these things where people just don't share their security data too much. Now, there was a lot of ransomware is happening with cryptocurrencies. And why? Now, notice this. So suppose I say, okay, wire 4.4 million to a bank account in Cayman Islands. Through the right warrants and so on, you can probably track the chain, right? And, people have done that. With cryptocurrencies, one of their things is anonymity. Essentially the transactions are logged into blockchains, and the transaction happens between public keys, basically. So for example, I have a public key. Let's say Ramesh has a public key. I can sort of have these smart contracts where I give you 4.4 million in cryptocurrency and I give it to the public key. And it's very hard. And this is one of the kind of the selling points of cryptocurrencies, where transactions are supposed to be anonymous and untraceable. Okay. And this is something that the ransomware, these hackers are exploiting, because you cannot track them. Now, these hackers came out, and they were sort of, through their methodology, what they were using, people were able to tell. But in general, if they had just stayed silent, you would not be able to track these cryptocurrencies transaction. So that's why a lot of the recent ransomware is mostly, they're saying, oh, pay us in cryptocurrencies. One of the selling points of crypto, the transactions on cryptocurrencies, is that they're untraceable. So on that note, I will pass it on to Ramesh, who's going to take my last slide and sort of talk more about what are the security and threat trends, what are some of the tools that are on the horizon, what are some of the techniques that you can use. Ramesh, passing on to you, please.
Thank you, Somesh. That was a great setup. And indeed, our next speaker is Ramesh Gupta, and he earned his master's degree from UW-Madison's Department of Computer Science. He's currently the Senior Vice President and General Manager of FireEye Incorporated's network security product portfolio, and that consists of web and email protection products. Prior to joining FireEye, Ramesh was the Senior Vice President of Product Operations for McAfee's network security business unit, which included network IPS, network firewall, web protection, email protection, data loss prevention, advanced threat defense, and identity theft protection. Before that, he was the founder, chief technical officer, and vice president of engineering for Introvert Networks, which was acquired by McAfee in May of 2003. Under his leadership, Introvert Networks designed and developed the award-winning and market-leading IntruShield Network IPS, which has been recognized as a leader in the field for 15 consecutive years. Ramesh, thanks for putting a great UW degree to terrific use. It's great to see the success stories like yours, and I look forward to you sharing a bit about how the ransomware world and cyber attack world looks from the perspective at FireEye.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor to be on this program, and thanks for the kind introduction. Let's see if I can get the first slide up, maybe the next slide. So I'd like to discuss some of the cybersecurity trends and walk you through the key trends in cybersecurity that have been evolving over the last few years. The first trend is the ever-expanding attack surface. The second trend is the number of attack vectors continuously is increasing, and we'll walk through some of the primary attack vectors. The third trend is the motivation of the attackers. This includes cybercrime, cyber espionage, and a few others. The other important trend in cybersecurity is the malware as a service ecosystem that's making it much easier to launch attacks by even an unsophisticated attacker. And finally, the threat actors are attacking with impunity, primarily because they're hiding behind a transnational attack infrastructure, and they're operating from countries where the United States does not have extradition treaties, which is really empowering and emboldening them to attack without worrying about any recourse. So in terms of the attack surface, historically, the attack surface was predominantly endpoints like laptops and desktops and internet-facing servers. These are servers like email servers, web servers that have an internet access, which allows email to flow in, and which allows their customers to access their websites and so on. The attack surface over the years has continuously expanded with the recent adoption of private and public cloud infrastructure. The attack surface now has expanded into that space. Applications, there are lots of applications that enterprises use, and many of them are very, very complex pieces of code that again provides another attack surface for attackers to penetrate. There's network infrastructure in every organization, such as VPN gateways, which are now very popular with everybody working from home remotely. Network routers, network switches, all of these use software, and whenever you have software, there are likely to be vulnerabilities in that software. Most enterprise customers also have Microsoft's Active Directory server, LDAP servers. If the organization is in the business of developing software for their own use, like IT application software, or developing products, they have source code control systems, they have build servers. Some organizations also have operational technology and industrial control systems, specifically, utility companies, energy companies, many organizations with factories and so on have that kind of an infrastructure, which is typically isolated from the IT infrastructure. In the last few years, we have seen a massive increase in number of industrial devices, like IoT devices, both in the consumer space as well as in enterprise space. As consumers, we now have many IP-enabled devices in our homes. Similarly, enterprises also have voice over IP devices, IP-based video conferencing devices, internet-enabled cameras, HVAC systems that can be connected over networks, etc. And then you have mobile devices. And this is not just the complete spectrum of devices that an attacker can try to target. This is just a subset. In fact, there are many more that are not listed here. But the point here is that the attack surface is continuously expanding, which is giving the opportunity for the threat actors to penetrate many organizations today quite easily, given that most organizations cannot protect this entire attack surface. And you'll see that in the next slide in terms of the various types of threats and the attack vectors. So the common attack vectors in terms of how an attacker penetrates an organization, the first one is vulnerability exploitation. And this is something that's been going on for more than 20 years. If you go back to 2001, there was a code red attack where attackers basically penetrated internet-facing web servers using a technique called buffer overflows. And with vulnerabilities, there are different categories. First is zero-day attacks, which means that the attacker is taking advantage of a undiscovered and undisclosed vulnerability. So that attacker managed to find a vulnerability and they take advantage of that before somebody discovers the vulnerability. And this is the most dangerous form of vulnerabilities, because with that, most security tools are unable to detect it. Most security tools are basically using signatures and mechanisms that are designed to detect known vulnerabilities and disclose vulnerabilities. The second area is vulnerabilities are known and discovered, but organizations have not had the time to patch the vulnerable systems. Typically, to patch a system, it requires significant effort for most organizations to make sure that the system is still available. They have to negotiate maintenance windows and make sure the system is brought down and patched and then brought back up. And that typically takes time. And sometimes enterprises are worried about patching a system just in case it breaks the application. So they're waiting to see if others have successfully patched before they go ahead and patch. And this creates a window of opportunity for attackers because the vulnerability is well known and the systems are not patched, and that allows the attacker to get in using that vulnerability. And finally, a lot of organizations are using outdated and unsupported software versions. In a recent security incident, organizations are using 20-year-old product, and that product had already gone end of life, and many organizations were still continuing to use the product. And that's another reason why threat actors are able to penetrate organizations by taking advantage of vulnerabilities in outdated and unsupported software versions. The second major threat vector is email. It is believed that more than 90% of the attacks today are coming through email. That number is something like 93%. And the attacks are coming through attachments and through web links. And when a user clicks on the web link, they're subject to a phishing attack. Attackers also use techniques like brand spoofing. They present a page that looks like your favorite bank, and it asks you to enter your username and password, and you put your credentials. And once you put in the credentials, the attacker now has your credentials, and they can then log in as you into your bank. Impersonation is another common technique where you might get an email from somebody higher up in your organization asking you to do something. And that's a common attack nowadays. And finally, attackers use social engineering. They basically lure you into clicking a bunch of buttons, which allows the malware to be deployed on your machine. So email is a very key attack vector. And as I said, more than 90% of the attacks today are coming through email. The third mechanism for compromising organizations is through misconfiguration of servers, network and security infrastructure. As Somesh just outlined, the Colonial Pipeline attack was conducted through a VPN device that that particular company was not monitoring. They were not even aware they had that VPN, and that VPN was not configured with two-factor authentication. And an attacker was able to get in using a compromised password. And so that just shows that you don't need to compromise a server, you don't need to compromise an endpoint. You can compromise a network infrastructure device like a VPN gateway. And the other challenge here is that a lot of enterprises don't use segmentation. So they basically allow open access from one network inside their organization to another network. So it makes it easy for attackers to move laterally inside organizations. The other attack vector is compromised passwords. So in a lot of the major compromises that have happened over the past few years, for example, many Yahoo email passwords were leaked and they're posted on the open web. And a lot of users, continue to use those compromised passwords, or they may be using the same password on multiple systems. And that's how compromised passwords are used, is through leakage of data to the public internet based on compromises that have occurred. And the other challenge is lack of two-factor authentication. So if you don't use two-factor authentication and just rely on passwords, and the passwords are compromised, it's very easy to break into a network. Another very sophisticated attack vector that we have recently seen with the SolarWinds sunburst attack is the supply chain attack. In this case, a software development organization was hacked, and malicious software was embedded in their software, which was then deployed in 18,000 or more organizations. Essentially, a backdoor was shipped with that software to their customer. This is a pretty complex attack. We haven't seen too many of these, but a nation-state attacker can easily do something like this. And finally, the attackers are innovating regularly, and they're deploying newer and newer evasion techniques, which make it harder to detect these attacks. And the pace at which the attackers are innovating, it's very, very difficult to match. So most organizations have to, essentially follow really good security best practices to ensure that they're not subject to these evasions. Next, we'll talk about the motivation for attacks. The predominant motivation for attacks is basically cybercrime. And as Somesh just walked through, in terms of cybercrime, ransomware and digital extortion is the number one threat today. Historically, cybercrime predominantly led to data theft, like credit card data or personally identifiable information, which can then be used for identity theft. Another motivation for cyber attacks is cryptojacking, where attackers take over. For example, they may take over my machine and use it for crypto mining. So essentially, they're using up the resources on my laptop to do mining, to do crypto mining. Another big motivation for attacks is cyber espionage. And here the attackers are predominantly after intellectual property, as well as obtain competitive information that they can then put to use. We've also seen cyber terrorism in play, where attackers are deliberately crippling physical infrastructure, such as water supply, power plants, or crippling the transportation infrastructure or banking and payment infrastructure, etc. And finally, we've also seen cyber warfare, where nation-state attackers have launched Viper malware that has erased, thousands of computers, and made the infrastructure unusable. So the motivation for attacks, varies, but the predominant motivation is cybercrime, and that's really what we're all currently challenged with. In terms of the attacker infrastructure, if you can move to the next slide. So the attack, historically, attackers had to build the infrastructure on their own, but nowadays there is an entire malware as a service ecosystem that they can leverage. So even an unsophisticated attacker can easily launch attacks by using this ecosystem. So this ecosystem consists of darknet marketplaces, command and control infrastructure, hosting services, cryptocurrency exchanges, and also it includes online money laundering services. So the bar for launching attacks has been dramatically lowered due to the malware as a service ecosystem. And this ecosystem is continuously expanding and is becoming even more easier every day that goes, in terms of the ease of use, ease of deployment, ease of launching attacks is continuously improving. Finally, I'd like to conclude my opening remarks with what can a typical organization do to prevent cyber attacks. So in terms of some of the best practices, the most important best practice is really reducing the attack surface. So to reduce the attack surface, you need to make sure that only those resources that need to be exposed to the internet are exposed, and only the components of those resources that need to be exposed should be exposed. So for example, if you have an internet-facing web server, the organization needs to make sure that only the web service is exposed and nothing else on that server is exposed. So the first and most important best practice is reducing the attack surface. Second, deploying or using two-factor authentication and making sure that the passwords are strong passwords. In fact, they should be passphrases and not words, so that it's much easier to guess the passphrase. The third thing that an organization should do is patching the vulnerabilities promptly and reduce the window between the discovery of a vulnerability and applying a patch to prevent that vulnerability from getting exploited. Another best practice is backup and restore. Today, a lot of organizations do an okay job. I think they need to really focus on this area significantly to make sure that there are good backups and to make sure that the restore works effectively. And the backup itself needs to be stored offline so that if an attacker compromises a system and deploys ransomware, they're easily able to recover the system by taking a backup and restoring. But if the backup itself is online, that itself could be subject to a ransomware attack. Another best practice is network segmentation. Enterprises need to make sure that their networks are segmented and the access to these networks is controlled to only those users and those devices and those applications that need such access. Another important best practice is cyber hygiene training. Given the large attack surface and the variety of threats and the variety of ways that hackers can get in, it's absolutely critical that every user of an organization receives proper training, specifically for to prevent phishing attacks. There are many techniques attackers use, and delivering such training to end users will reduce the possibility of a phishing attack from becoming successful. A lot of organizations also are not prepared for a security incident. So it's important to have an incident response plan. Also, organizations should engage in conducting penetration testing regularly to see what their weak points are and then address those quickly. And finally, every organization needs to have defense in depth, which means they cannot rely on a single security layer or a single security product. And they need endpoint security, they need email security, they need network security, they need cloud security, etc. So having a defense in depth strategy is absolutely critical. So with that, I'll pass it back to Mike, and you're ready for any questions here.
Ramesh, thank you. Before I go to audience questions, I'm going to ask a question of both of you. Having listened to this for half an hour, I can only imagine, if my grandparents were listening to this and, like, what have we gotten ourselves into? You've explained that you think these attacks are just going to continue to escalate. So at what point would we say the value added by the internet is not worth the costs that is beginning to impose? I'm thinking about a children's book, The Simple People, about how incrementally everything seems rational, and at some point you end up in a place that just makes no sense, because why are we dealing with all this? Is it really worth it? Make the case.
So, Mike, that's an excellent question. There is a phrase that the most secure computer system is that one that sits in a steel bunker and is not connected to the internet. But again, I think there is this utility. I would say that yes, this the cybersecurity side has really become very complicated, and there's all these attacks. But I think the benefit of the internet, I would say, has been, it's basically almost a new industrial revolution, I would say. So I think the benefits, at least to me, have outweighed, these little things that we have, these attacks and so on. These are, to me, a little warts, but I think at least on balance, I would say they have outweighed, the internet has outweighed the benefits versus the harm. What do you think?
I would agree with that if I was a computer science professor. The benefits would be much greater. However, if I'm just somebody that needs gas on the East Coast, this wasn't happening 40 years ago. Ramesh.
So I think we're at a point of no return, right? Our lives are completely interwoven with the digital world today. And just like in the physical world, you have the bad guys in the physical world too. And, you need to be careful when you go out in the middle of the night, make sure you're not in darkness. You protect yourself when you're trying to get into your car or, walking on a street where you're not familiar with. So I think the same thing applies to the cyber world, in the sense we all need to be cautious about what we do and how we do. Just like we have gates and doors to our homes, we have a security monitoring systems in our homes. The same thing is required in the cyber world. So I think we're at a point of no return, and we only need to figure out how to solve this problem, as opposed to saying, can we minimize the use of the internet or the cyber world?
So tell me, what steps should governments be taking right now to stop the attacks or somehow reduce the incentives? Can we start punishing the harboring countries? Can we find the perpetrators? And if we did, what would we do?
I think one thing that I think Ramesh will also talk a little bit about this. One thing that is very hard is that there are enough sophisticated tools now that. So, by the way, one person. This is for you guys for future maybe you do now. There is a person in the FBI cyber crimes division in Milwaukee who this is all he does, sort of catching these guys. He actually gives a great guest lecture in my security class. The big thing is a lot of the evidence that you collect in these kind of things. What I have, at least from what I can tell, is it's not clear they hold up in court. So, for example, let's say I do some IP tracking and say, oh, I knew that this thing, it went through this relay server, went to this. I mean, think about a 60-year-old judge sitting there and the jury sitting there and they're listening to all this. And a lot of this stuff it's very hard to prosecute. So I think the thing will be short of maybe having treaties with different countries where, you can probably share evidence, maybe extradite people. But I just wanted to say it's very challenging in this digital world to have evidence with enough provenance that you can then just go in the court of law. That's why a lot of the cyber criminals have gone free. Ramesh, do you have any perspectives to add?
Yeah, sure. I think, there's a lot that can be done by our governments. First of all, there could be better tracking of the attackers and their activities, and prosecuting the bad guys and creating deterrence. Right now, we are mostly focusing on defense in terms of how can we defend ourselves, but there's very little being done in the form of deterrence. And that's because there's not much recourse today. So I think we need to change policies, regulations, and focus more on deterrence and with using multinational collaboration, building extradition treaties where required if they don't exist today. So if that is done and there's better coordination between the government and the enterprise organizations, more information can be shared between each other, and information can be shared in a timely manner. So there's a lot that can be done. Obviously, this is a huge task, and some steps are already being put in place by President Biden's team as we speak. I think there are critical organizations like CISA, FBI that are already playing a tremendous role here, and there's more that they can do going forward. And some of this requires lawmakers help as well in terms of passing the appropriate policies and laws to make this possible.
Can we set up an internet system that only countries that agree to extradition treaties can access?
I think the internet is not something that can be controlled today easily.
I think that cat is out of the bag, Mike. I think.
And there will never be another cat born again.
Maybe right? There will be another generation of an internet. Who knows? Maybe after we are gone.
Obviously, an ill-informed question. I will go to an audience question from James Nelkin. How did the federal government manage to recover some of the ransom paid in cryptocurrency? And what's the likelihood of repeating such tracing even if hackers change their methods?
So I think from what I can tell, I think if it was all in cryptocurrencies with anonymous credentials, I don't think they would have been able to trace. My hunch is somebody probably changed their cryptocurrency through some exchange through a real currency. So I don't know about how they were able to trace.
So this particular incident recently with the Colonial Pipeline, the reports say that basically the cryptocurrency got moved from one wallet to another and finally ended up in a wallet for which the FBI had the decryption key. So it ended up in a FBI wallet for which they had the key, and they were able to go in and retrieve it. But they're just fortunate that the attackers moved the cryptocurrency from several wallets. They were trying to move it from wallet to wallet so that it cannot be tracked, and the activity would be obfuscated. But they ended up into a wallet where the FBI had access to it, and they were able to recover the money. And it's not guaranteed that this will happen again. Right?
Yeah, so there is no guarantee of James. I think if they were just lucky that they had the key corresponding to that wallet. I mean, so they just got lucky.
So it's not like the FBI is onto this.
Yeah. They probably got the key through some raid or through some data that they had access to.
Not likely to be repeated. Okay.
Or at least it's not systematic.
Yeah. So a fine point made by an academic. I appreciate that. Not systematic. Question from Ann Culver, and I think this relates to your description of the Colonial Pipeline situation, Somesh. How did the hackers know what level of access they would attain on the account they had hacked? Did they know, or did they just kind of discover that once they got in the system?
I think once you kind of penetrate the system, you can kind of start sort of like just almost like probing. And what I could tell from the article, maybe Ramesh, you know more, it was an account where they were able to access quite a bit. They could have gone, let me just say this, at least the article that I read, they could have done a lot more damage than they did. They just mostly got some data, but they could have got into the control systems. So to answer your question, you basically, once you have the initial breach, you just have to kind of probe various servers in your thing just to figure out what access you had. But what I could tell is they had pretty good access after that, right, Ramesh? From what I could tell.
Yeah, in a typical attack, attacker enters your organization through a particular credential, and then once they get in, they will try to gain privileged credentials. So that they will basically launch additional attacks inside. They may penetrate another machine using a vulnerability or using the same password, and then they'll try to increase their privilege level. And once they increase the privilege level, then they're able to get to privileged resources. So a determined attacker can easily move around in an organization and increase their privilege level.
And how do attackers get paid? I mean, are there attackers who are paid a salary by a sponsoring government and then an incentive when they actually hold up Colonial Pipeline?
I think Ramesh touched on it, right? There's malware as a service. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this stuff, these very good hackers, they put these malware, this cryptojacking code, ransom code. They actually, when you buy this on the dark web as malware, they get paid. It's like a bazaar for hackers. So I don't know what the pricing is, but they get paid.
What do you think the wage rate is, or the annual compensation of a sophisticated hacker in some of these countries? In Iran?
At least not Iran. Last year there was somebody from East Europe who was some hacker who was actually killed. And they found that his bank account, it was like around 60 or 70 million. He was a pretty young guy. So I don't know how much they make, but some of them can make quite a bit of money. I don't know, Ramesh, do you know anything? How much a top hacker would make per year or something?
Well, definitely it's a lot more lucrative than taking a regular job somewhere, right? So that's why they're engaged in this profession. But some nations do pay their hackers, right? It's like a job. Yeah. It's a paid job where they are doing this work on behalf of a nation state. But there's a lot.
Who has the biggest workforce?
I think
that's on the payroll.
Probably, right? I think right now it's probably China, if I had to guess, this of the network of hackers. But I'm just guessing. Ramesh, do you know off the top of your head
Yeah, a
which
lot of
that is?
the cybercrime activity today comes from the Eastern European and Russia and so on. That's where much of the cybercrime is.
I think Mike is more asking about nation state hackers.
Yeah, that includes many nations today, like China, like Russia, Iran.
$15 minimum wage isn't going to stop this.
No, I don't think $15 is what they get.
Okay, fair enough. From Laura Weber, as this risk becomes more severe and unpredictable, do you have any predictions how insurers in this market will respond? What are cyber insurance premiums going to do, and companies, will they survive?
There is a lot of activity in this space, and maybe Ramesh knows more. What I have heard is it's very hard to value so for example, let's say Colonial Pipeline goes for an insurance and says, hey, if a hacker again gets ransomware through me, give me insurance. From what I can tell, it's not like insuring a car, or you have to know the risk evaluation, right? If I want to price that insurance, I need to do a risk evaluation. What I have heard is that's extremely tricky. Think Ramesh.
Yeah, probably it's an area where use-based insurance would make sense, because there's kind of a moral hazard problem here. If I have a great policy, why am I going to bother with two-factor authentication, right? So
I think Ramesh just dropped out, but I can handle questions.
Well, he's had a long work week, we know. I mean, the man is defending society.
Yeah, I think I think he's back. So I think there is a burgeoning field of something called cyber insurance, but what I can tell you is that it's very tricky insurance, from what I can tell from a lot of the bankers. It's very hard to sort of price it.
Yeah, what are the issues with cyber insurance, Ramesh? Is there a big moral hazard problem because the insured might not adequately care for their data now that I've got insurance? Or
well, it's the insurance payouts are becoming smaller and smaller over a period of time because the number of attacks are growing and the number of claims are growing. So it's not that easy to basically protect the data loss and the theft, data theft, etc., just based on pure insurance premium payouts. With more and more attacks and more breaches, it's going to become harder to get insurance to cover for the loss.
Yeah, companies
just like in the real physical world today. Yeah, in the physical world today, if there's a massive fire in your area, the insurance premiums will go up, and insurers will not be willing to insure homes and so on. So it's the same thing in the cyber world as well.
Right. Premiums are probably going through the roof, and it'll equilibrate, but it's probably been a rough time for insurers as these attacks have escalated, I would guess.
Yeah.
Jim Kennedy asks if you can talk about the hackers code. Do they actually destroy the data after being paid? And, if they're so anonymous, why would they do that? Why wouldn't they still use the data and exploit it and make more money?
Well, you mean like in the Colonial, why they already had 100 gigabytes of data? Why don't they just keep it? And well, I think this is like, okay, if a kidnapper, if you give them the money, why should they return the person, right? I mean, there is a little bit of, I guess, reputation effect here, right? I mean, if they don't do that, then, but I don't know. I think there is nothing really stopping them from holding the data and coming again after 2 months and saying, hey, we still have the data. But Ramesh, do you have a better answer for that?
Yeah,
Or?
no, I think you have to trust the attacker that they're going to destroy the data, but there is no guarantee they're going to destroy the data. So in a lot of these cases, they're stealing the data and then they're encrypting the data. And when you pay the ransom, they allow you to decrypt the data, and sometimes even the decryption does not work. You pay the ransom, you get the decryption key, and the decryption key does not work. So you could have paid the ransom, and you're not even able to recover the data. So and they can easily reuse the data and expose it in the future, even after you pay the ransom. So there's no guarantee that by paying ransom, the data will be destroyed and they will not use it for some other purpose. So,
yeah, I suppose.
So Jim, I think you just can't trust them. You just give them the money. You just have to trust that they destroy it.
Yeah, and I would imagine the biggest deterrent is their own future ability to collect payments for ransom, because that would be reduced, I guess, if we didn't have confidence they would destroy the data. And probably some of their peers would be really unhappy. And, this probably is a world where people know of each other, and, you might not feel safe if you broke the code, I
maybe
guess.
Just a reputation effect. You're right, Mike.
Question for you, Somesh, from Mike Bowes. He's heard a little bit about the Computing, Data, and Information School at UW. How are they working to advance research in this space, and are there partnerships with industry that might address some of these challenges?
Yeah, actually, so CDIS is a sort of a school that has computer science, statistics, and information systems. Tom Erickson is our director. And yeah, there's a lot of research going on. We have 4 or 5 very active faculty doing research in the cybersecurity space. We do collaborate. For example, I just have a collaboration with Palo Alto Networks that's going on. But just to be very frank, I think we could do that better to have the industrial partners. But we do have a very strong group of researchers and faculty who are maybe not specifically ransomware, but security in IoT and other spaces. So we do have a very active group. But to be totally honest, we could do better in connecting with the local industry or other industry as well. By the way, one of the co-founders of Palo Alto Network is also one of our graduates. I think he overlapped with Ramesh, Ravi Batra.
Yes, indeed he is. And he was not able to join us tonight and said, I think you should ask Ramesh Gupta. So,
oh, nice.
Yes, he gets the assist on tonight's show while Ramesh scores all the points. So I guess a final question, what should an organization like the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association do? What are the 3 most important things that we should be doing to minimize the risk of cyber incidents, ransomware attacks, etc.? And I'll go to Ramesh.
Ramesh, go
for it. I think I'll go back to my concluding slide, and that is one is end user awareness and training in terms of how attackers lure someone into clicking links or opening an attachment, and what you should do and what you should not do. Second is using strong passwords, using 2-factor authentication to make sure that your credentials are not compromised, or even if they're compromised, an attacker cannot get into your network just based on password alone. The third thing is making sure that you have a good process in place to patch vulnerabilities. First figure out what vulnerabilities exist in your organization, and then patch them regularly. So I think those I would say are the top 3, and then there are many more, but we'll stop right there.
We only seek 3 things in these kind of programs, Ramesh. Top 3, that's what we need.
Sure.
So Somesh, Ramesh, I'll give you each, we're at the top of the hour now. If you have any advice for individuals, in how to prevent identity theft and, what should we all be concerned about? And what are there some things you would maybe advise people avoid doing on the web that could make them more vulnerable? And I'll start with Somesh and then conclude with Ramesh.
Yeah, so one thing I would definitely be doing is, so two things. One is Ramesh already touched on it, is that if you get an email, be very careful if you get suspicious email with an attachment. For example, like I just got an email a few days back saying, oh, this is your chair. Why don't you call me at this cell phone? I need to really talk to you. Give me your cell phone number. And it was basically a spear phishing style attack because I could see the email address. And I was like, okay, this is like weird, some weird Gmail, Ramsey, Arpachi Dusso 1293 at Gmail. And I know that's not his Gmail. So I never and he also had an attachment there. So just be very careful in sort of vetting the emails. Second is just strong passwords and two-factor authentication. I know it is, a lot of people think it's a real pain having two-factor, but I think, even for things like my local accounts now, nothing to do with the university, I use two-factor. So it's just mostly that, just following the same security hygiene. One thing I just end with, when you go to a website, some websites, if you're shopping on, not Amazon, some smaller stores, you will see this thing pop up that says security certificate chain not validated. You see sometimes that pops up on your thing. Don't shop in that store. Basically what happened is your browser did not recognize the public key corresponding to that. And you see that at a lot of stores, that pops up. And I still see people just go ahead saying, yeah, that's fine. Let me just go shop anyhow. Go ahead, Ramesh.
Well, my three pieces of advice for all of us. First, if you are reading email, read the email on your smartphone, hopefully an Apple iPhone. It's much more difficult for an attacker to get into your iPhone than on your, let's say, Windows laptop, for example. So if you're reading your email, first of all, don't open any suspicious email. But if you do open a suspicious email, if you open it on your iPhone, you're very unlikely to get hacked. Second is make sure the password for every site or every website, every bank, every trading brokerage account you have, each of them is unique and different, and make sure they're very difficult to guess passwords. Besides two-factor, as Somesh pointed out, wherever there's two-factor authentication, enable that. But if there's no two-factor authentication, make sure that you're not reusing the password on multiple websites. And today, each of us, create like 200 passwords because every little site that you go to asks you for a password, and just don't repeat the same password, anywhere, so that if one password gets compromised, you're not putting at risk. The third thing is, if you're using a browser, I would recommend you use the Google Chrome browser. That is much more safe and secure compared to, for example, a Microsoft IE browser or an Explorer browser. And I have more confidence in the Google Chrome browser, and I would recommend that even, on a laptop, for example.
Yeah, don't at the end I will end. Don't be like my mom, whose password is my sister's name and 10.
Hey, at least your mom's
that is a little bit long, and not easy to guess.
At least your mom's using a computer, huh? How about it?
Very, very reluctantly.
Yes. Well, I can relate to that. I was not successful getting my mom on an iPhone. I tried. Well, gentlemen, it's really been a pleasure having you on this evening. Really important topic. Really appreciate your insights and advice. Much appreciated. And thank you for being a part of our program. Look forward to having you back again at some point down the road to talk more about this important topic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
We'll be back in 2 weeks. We're on our summer schedule now, so we meet every 2 weeks. June 29th, we'll be talking about supply chains, labor shortages, and the specter of inflation. So until then, thanks for joining us, and on Wisconsin.